Welcome to the first Dharma talk. The topic for this evening is embodied investigation. And I'd like to continue on the theme that we touched on this afternoon with the inquiry process. But also, as you may have noticed, we've been talking a lot about coming back to what's unfolding. What is unfolding in the moment. Been coming back to reality as it's manifesting. And we've been doing that with the Anapanasati Sutta practice, noticing what happens naturally as we sit. And then with the somatic practices, following the impulses of the body and the movement. And then the inquiry as well, coming back to that immediacy, present moment experience. So we're going to look a little deeper into this Dhamma Vikaya, which is translated into investigation, inquiry, or discernment. And the word Dhamma refers to phenomena, reality, truth, or the nature of things. So Dhamma Vikaya is a process of investigating phenomena, nature of reality. It's a kind of inquiry that leads to wisdom and letting go. And as I briefly mentioned in the morning, investigation is one of the 7 factors of awakening. And these are very beautiful qualities of an awakened heart, mind. And I'll just read them to you again. Mindfulness, energy, joy, tranquility, and equanimity. And investigation is one of them. So the main purpose of investigation is to support clear seeing, a deeper understanding of reality. And we do that by using anything that comes, anything that arises in our experience can be a portal to that. You may have heard that quote, "Whatever is on the way, it is the way." So literally anything can be a portal back to presence. And this is at the heart of spiritual practice, to meet reality directly, to be with whatever arises in our experience with intimacy and immediacy, without pushing anything away and without clinging. This is at the basis. And at the heart of awakening, we're going towards this dissolving of division between ourselves and reality. Dissolving the separation between experience and the experiencer. Dissolving that duality. So in order to do that, whatever arises in our experience then becomes a portal back to that dissolution of separateness and returning to our interconnected nature. So inquiry, this quality of investigation brings us closer to experience, as you may have noticed that in meditation as well as inquiry practice, we turn towards experience. So one of the shadow sides of meditation practice is that we can sit back too much and be a little detached from experience, a little bit outside, out of the body, distant. So the quality of investigation ensures that there is not a detachment happening. Yeah, we're here. We're with it. Sometimes what often happens in practice is that we get overly identified with our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and we get lost and caught in those things. So investigation also ensures that we create a little buffer, and that we don't get so lost in it. So there's a direct link between investigation and equanimity. Gabrielle will be talking more about equanimity. But equanimity is really our capacity to be intimate with our experience without losing our center. So the Pali word for equanimity is upekkha. And there are two main translations: to look over, to see things from a broader perspective, and to stay in the middle of this. In other words, we're not only observing from a distance, which is the shadow side of equanimity, we're actually in the middle of experience, very intimate with it. So equanimity has this beautiful balance of perspective, bigger vision, and intimacy with experience. This is what Jack Kornfield says. Jack Kornfield is a beautiful Western insight teacher. He says, "True equanimity is not a withdrawal. It is a balanced engagement with all aspects of life. It is opening to the whole of life with composure and ease of mind, accepting the beautiful and terrifying nature of all things. Equanimity embraces the loved and the unloved, the agreeable and the disagreeable, pleasure and pain. It eliminates clinging and aversion." It's about opening to everything. So investigation strengthens equanimity because of its capacity to not only be fully in contact with experience, but it also leads to clarity and discernment to what's happening. So it's all very connected. So what does it mean to meet reality directly? What are we talking about here? To be with things as they are, with intimacy. So to meet reality directly means we go deeper than the usual stories. We drop beneath the labels and concepts and usual ways of knowing our experience, our ideas about what's going on. And we do that through returning to our embodied experience. What's happening freshly, directly, in this moment, through the body. There's a Pali word, sampajana, that points to this process of direct knowing. So sampajana is translated into clear comprehension. So clear comprehension is one of the main aspects of mindfulness. And so mindfulness, when the Buddha used to use the word mindfulness, it wouldn't come on its own. Sati. Sati's translation, sati means mindfulness in Pali. He would use sati sampajana. So mindfulness and clear comprehension, it always comes together. So clear comprehension is this direct knowing of reality. And that's beyond concept. And that's why one of the main teachings in the contemplation practices, the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha begins with the body. And the body is the first foundation of mindfulness. Because that's how we begin to develop this capacity for clearly comprehending something, for direct knowing something. So clear comprehension means to know something beyond our intellectual knowing. Concept, beyond concept, which is not our usual way of knowing things. Yeah. So we usually know things through conceptual reality, through our thoughts, labels, ideas. Yeah. And in fact, we have a whole memory bank of feelings associated with images and memories that gives us some sense of familiarity about what is happening. But these are all associations that live more on the surface level, more on the automatic way. So as soon as we have an experience, in the moment we have an experience, whatever that is, when we look at something, when we smell, when we taste, straight away there is this labeling. We attach a story, a label, an idea, projections onto that feeling. So before we even actually feel into it, we already know something based in our past, in our ideas. And we're doing that all the time. We're kind of living in this conceptual reality without realizing. And we do that to people and situations all the time. And that prevents us from seeing people clearly, seeing situations clearly. It's almost like we're just living in based in the stories and in the memories. And you do that to objects, as well. This computer, even before we really get to sense into it and drop lower, we already know what it is. And that leads to a lot of conflict too in the world, because when we think we know something and we can't, we have this identification with the story and with the concept. We create rigid views about what that particular thing is. And in that rigidity, we create this standpoint as if it was the only reality. The other day I saw a really funny cartoon of two Zen monks looking at a tree, and one of them points and says, "They call that a tree," which is almost like pointing to how funny is it that we straight away we label something and we make that a thing, and we believe in it, we hold on to it. So this labeling, kind of conceptualizing, creates this subtle gap between direct experience and conceptual reality. And it's almost like we're more a little bit more on the surface of things actually than beneath it. So the moment that we label something, if we're not paying attention, we risk disconnecting from the actual living reality and from the freshness of things. And with the mystery as well, the mystery of what's unfolding in the moment. So we lose the present moment. So the Buddha saw this gap between reality, freshness, experience, and our ideas about it, the core reason we suffer. Because when we're living in the ideas about things, we're living in delusion, and conditioning, and not in reality itself. And it's also what leads to that sense of separation. And this feeling separate is kind of what leads to that existential type of fear. We don't see our interconnected nature. There's this ongoing search for something that we don't quite know what it is, but it's just something that we can drop in every moment, into the body. So one of the main tasks on this path, on the spiritual journey, which is also one of our biggest challenges, is learning to disidentify with the contents of our experience, with our thoughts, and with the conceptual reality. And that doesn't mean they don't exist. Concepts and thoughts and labels will always be there. This is what we do as human beings, because it's what gives us a sense of self, a sense of location, self-consciousness. But if we recognize those as just rafts for understanding an experience rather than the actual reality of it, that's okay. We can loosen the grip around it a little bit. So our main task is to soften this identification with the stories and the thoughts and the thinking process, and learn to drop and open more fully to the felt, lived experience in the moment. Whatever is happening in the moment, whatever is unfolding, is manifesting freshly, directly. So how does this type of knowing is accessed? So there's a really wonderful body of work by a philosopher named Eugene Gendlin. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. Eugene Gendlin, he created a process called focusing. And focusing is a process that supports us in finding the felt sense of things. Felt sense is something that we all inherently have. Yeah, it's always here. And yet it's easy to disconnect from it. So Eugene Gendlin, he created steps that actually support this deeper connection with our felt sense, with our felt knowing. And one of his main interests actually in his work is in how we create meaning and language, which is a really interesting thing to think about. How language is created out of experience and out of meaning. So meaning happens first and then comes language. And yet we get identified with the language itself. And we forget there's this whole intricate way of knowing that's deeper than that. He calls it the philosophy of the implicit. So he's been one of the main person in this field of the felt sense, and this is not a new word. Yeah, the felt sense is used in many different fields, including Buddhism, but he in particular, he went quite deep only in that, phenomenologically teasing it out. How does the felt sense creates meaning, labels, symbols, what he calls symbols. So from his view, emotions, thoughts, perceptions, these are symbols that emerge out of the felt sense. And the way this links to Buddhism is that we get identified with the symbols and we forget the living experience, the living being that we are. So there's a freshness. The felt sense is something fresh, is something new. It's where metaphor often comes out of. Yeah. Different meanings, associations that we make. A lot of art comes out of felt sense. A lot of the newness that we create. So one of the characteristics of a felt sense, he calls it the murky field that lives beneath conceptual reality. Prior to symbols, to language, to emotions, to feelings, to perceptions. So this murky field is where our actual felt experience and knowing of reality lives. So there is a quality of freshness and dynamism. It's dynamic, constantly changing, flowing. And again, that's not to say that symbols are not part of it. They are. They will always be. Humans connect through symbols. We speak through language. And that's not the problem. The problem is when we get identified with them and forget there is a dynamism, something deeper beneath all of that. So, as we begin to connect with this field, with this murkiness, with this freshness of experience, that manifests in the body moment to moment, our usual conceptual way of living begins to soften. So it's something that happens naturally as we drop inside. It's not about getting rid of concepts. It's actually, as we drop inside, something begins to loosen the grip, the identification and the clinging of the self. And this is why awakening is an embodied process. It's an embodiment process. Because we are learning to drop into this field that is felt through the body, in and through the body. So clinging naturally dissolves. Not because we're forcing it, but there is a different way of knowing and being in reality. There's more freshness, aliveness. So this process of dropping beneath the storyline and investigating and being directly with the felt sense of reality is not something we do naturally. It's not our automatic way of being in the world. Yeah. So it's something that requires some degree of effort and willingness to go beyond our ideas and stories about ourselves and others. So some qualities, 4 qualities I named here, of mind that supports investigation. So the first one is the willingness to know the truth. A deep willingness to know what is really going on in this moment. What's really here? Not my thoughts about it. We want to know really what's going on here. Krishnamurti speaks a lot about this quality, willingness to know, go to reality. If we're ever asking any questions, it's because we're not in reality. And the second one is curiosity, a genuine curiosity to know what is happening. Openness. To go towards something without our usual judgments and filters. And the third one is being comfortable with the unknown, which I see that to be one of the biggest reasons why we fear leaving the stories and actually coming home to our experience. Because there is some kind of safety and familiarity to staying in the known, in the stories. It's how we have a sense of self, a sense of identity. Gives us safety to know and to hold on to concepts and views. So through investigation, we begin to unbind that storytelling, which can be challenging for the ego structure. And the fourth quality that supports investigation is wisdom. So the more mindfulness on board and the more we understand the conditionality, the conditioned nature of reality, that whatever is happening for us in this moment is based on causes and conditions, family background, whatever happened is happening around us in a given moment. We then can turn toward experience from equanimity and wisdom. And in turn, as we begin to do that, wisdom continues to get stronger, continues to grow. So it's a two-way thing. So how do we investigate? How does it actually happen? What are we even talking about here? So we can investigate anything in our experience. So the purpose of investigation is always to bring us back home to reality. So anything can be a portal into that. Yeah, so this is about awakening. So present moment experience. We can inquire into our present moment experience. Even right now, if you drop inside, sensing what's here. Sensations, thoughts come with it. But if you follow a little deeper, you're going to find something else. You're going to find a felt sense. Particular pattern. Yeah. Sometimes it's one of the easiest ways we get hooked in disconnection, detachment from reality is when we are caught in patterns or difficult patterns or something automatic behaviors that we've been doing over and over again. They become so automatized that we continue to disconnect. So we can choose to look directly at a pattern and find where that lives in the body. How is that felt in the moment? So once recognized, we then open up to the embodied experience of that thing we're being mindful of. So we begin to look for the felt sense. And sometimes that's not readily available. Yeah. So I'll give you an example of that. In the presence of anger. So anger is a very strong emotion. Yeah. So usually when there is anger in the body, we notice maybe some reactivity, yeah, some action wanting to be taken. Many thoughts about the person, the situation, or about ourselves. And there's this whole cascade of thoughts and impulses. But if you take a step back a little, we can notice the sensations in the body. Yeah, maybe tightness, grippiness, hate, an impulse. So investigation begins to kind of turn toward it. And then as we begin to drop deeper, what first started as a gross sensation, a tightness, a heat, something, it changes. Yeah? It begins to drop a little deeper. And perhaps that then becomes something a little heavier, solid, something in the belly you haven't felt before. And then as you stay with that, that begins to shift. And then what was once anger is not anger anymore. Yeah, it either shifts, it changes into something else. Perhaps you're now touching fear. Or you touch some kind of vulnerability. And that also changes. So investigation is this willingness to stay with the changing field, changing sensations. Because oftentimes when we sit to inquire, we can, might be looking for an answer, yeah, or for an insight. which is absolutely valuable. But the investigation, we're developing this capacity to stay in this dynamic field of change. Phenomena that never lands anywhere. And then we begin to find there is nothing that ever stays. But of course, transformation happens with that. Change, transformation happens through the body. And this was one of the particular beautiful gifts of Eugen Gendlin, because he was also a psychotherapist. So he did this whole research. I think it was Carl Rogers he did it with. They both did a few years of study in clients. They compared clients that improved or healed quickly with clients who didn't. And the study showed that was clients who could stay with the body without jumping into conclusions, into, the thinking process, were the ones who healed quicker. There's a profound power in this also embodied transformation as a result, not as a goal. He says, Eugen Gendlin, what is split off, not felt, remains the same. When it is felt, it changes. Most people are not aware of this. They think that change takes place by thinking it over or by figuring it out. But the change only happens when you feel it and stay with the feeling until it lets you see something new. So willingness to stay with the unknown, staying with the experience, stay with the body, begins to reveal something different. And that's the most challenging thing. We're speaking as if it was easy. But I myself, I am a somatic therapist, and it's the hardest thing for clients to stay in the body. And that's okay, because don't want to force anything, because then the unconscious doesn't cooperate. But it is challenging for everyone, because it's compelling to jump out of the experience. It's compelling to follow a thought. It's compelling to identify with an emotion. This is the self-consciousness, the gripping of the self that the Buddha speaks about. We get identified with what arises in our experience. So there is a beautiful interconnection here, or relationship between this work of Eugen Gendlin and the teachings. So what this does, this process of dropping, deepening, staying with the felt sense, leads into insight into the nature of reality, which is what leads to awakening. So there is a lot of wisdom that begins to emerge. So the Buddha spoke of the three characteristics of existence, and the three laws that are true, whether we want it or not, whether we like it or not. They're truths that are always here for this body and in the universe, which is impermanence. The first one is impermanence. So as we stay with the changing phenomena, as we begin to see how reality is not solid, emotions shift, change, thoughts are not as solid, grippy. And the felt sense gives this direct knowing of impermanence. Emotion turns into sensation, turns its qualities into something else. Something shifts. Insight comes. The second characteristic of existence is dukkha, or suffering. So this is where we see dukkha really directly. We're not only conceptually understanding suffering, old age, sickness, and death. We know we're born in a sensitive body, and this is the first noble truth, the truth of dukkha, of suffering. The insight into dukkha happens directly when we stay with our pain, our emotions, our feelings very directly, and we sense the letting go of it because we see through it. We see the impermanent nature. So the Buddha was really clear in saying that dukkha is not based on what is happening to us, but how we relate to what is happening. And it's in the clinging. We suffer because we cling to experience. It's not because of the experience itself, the first arrow. It's in the clinging. So to drop deeper and be able to stay with the field that's changing, emotion shifting, we feel the dukkha directly. And the third characteristic is not self, insight into anatta. So we notice how something that was so real, like an anger, for example, a feeling of anger can feel so real in the moment. We get so identified with it. But then if we stay long enough and it changes, that identification softens. We're like, wow, I was so identified with it. So we can get an understanding that what we took something to be really solid and real in a moment, it actually isn't. It changes. So insight into not self is more that nothing is long-lasting and permanent as we think it is. So inquiry, or investigation, it not only brings us back into presence and leads to insight and, back to reality, but it also has this potential of unbinding, from pain, from usual patterns that we often get hooked in. Because we go to the root, to the implicit, to the body. That's where we carry all of our maps of reality that were created way back. They are, systems in this unconscious that is in the body. So, as I was saying before, even though that's not the intention, it can be really, really beautiful and powerful in supporting our healing journey. And some of you may be familiar with the RAIN process that was created by Michelle McDonald, a Dharma teacher, and then by Tara Brach, she did an adaptation of that map. But they kind of created this rain process as a process of supporting this process of unbinding from patterns that are very ingrained, that we get very hooked in. And it's a beautiful map. So I'll tell you what the acronym letters stand for. So the R is recognition of a pattern. And we recognize what we're hooked in. A is for accept. And we accept that in mindfulness. Then we investigate. And investigation is through the felt sense in the body. As I was saying before, it's not an intellectual investigation. And then finally, there is a loosening around that already. And compassion may arise, depending on the pattern that you were holding. Just this week, I had an experience of something that I was expecting to do with another friend in a project with work. And it didn't go ahead. And I was really looking forward to it. And I noticed a dismissiveness from my side. I was like, I actually don't feel anything about that. It's fine. I was surprised I didn't feel the impact of that. But that whole day, there was something unsettled. And I was like, I wonder if that's what it is. But there was a detachment from it. So, okay, I'm going to sit and see what that actually is about. And then what was detachment became this real deep sense of stabbing in the heart. I actually felt like I was being stabbed, betrayed. That was the intensity of it. Maybe that's why I was detaching from it, right? Because it was very intense. So what happened between her and I left me feeling this big sense of betrayal. So it was interesting because it started with detachment, right? Then that detachment, I saw behaviors that were pointing to that. I was like, okay, there's detachment here. Numbing, distracting ourselves. We do that quite a bit. So as I actually sat with it, very uncomfortable stabbing pain. And no one likes to feel that. And then as I felt into it, betrayal, symbols, that betrayal, and then I dropped back, darkness, heaviness, real strong sense of something in the back and in the front. Stayed, tears came. And then there was anger. And then stories. I should do this, I should act on it, message her, whatever. And then no, came back, felt the anger. It softened. And there was a deep sadness that came. It's like, actually, there is pain here. So this whole layer happening. And then that sadness shifted into a tenderness. It was like this sweetness of something actually softening, but also there was self-compassion. Like, wow, I was holding all this pain. And so notice how this is not an intellectual compassion. I should be compassionate to that feeling, which is fine too, to do that sometimes. But actually, heart qualities come online naturally when there is awareness and feeling into the pain that comes online. And this is the beauty of investigation, because it really brings us back to our humanity, to what's actually happening. So awakening, healing, they're quite intertwined in that way. They're not separate things. We don't awaken through transcending our reality. Rather, we come back to what's happening. And that begins to move, and something shifts and changes. And the beautiful thing about using our own pain and suffering as fuel for inquiry is that not only insight arises, but the heart comes online. And then that heart meets whatever is here with compassion and kindness. And as we do that, we're also able to bring that to others. We understand pain directly, we understand suffering very directly. Thich Nhat Hanh says, when we are mindful, deeply in touch with the present moment, our understanding of what is going on deepens, and we begin to be filled with acceptance, joy, peace, and love. So a real beautiful portal back to present moment, to our humanity, and to compassion for others, because when we see how hard it is when we are gripped, it's much easier to be compassionate when we notice others also being gripped. So I will finish with a poem by Mark Nepo. It says, "To be broken is no reason to see all things as broken. Pain is how the heart comes to see. It is the murmur of a deeper truth, longing to be heard. When we lean in, when we stop running from the ache, we find not destruction, but the clarity that comes from being touched deeply." Let's just take a moment of silence. Thank you for your attention.